Hey, what's up? This is GC Kinsey here with another video in my series about passing culture, this time focusing on the concept of passing privilege. In my previous video called How Passing Culture Fails Us All, I talked about the word passing and how it's a little iffy for me because it implies that if you don't pass, you fail. And now there's another term I see a lot in discussions around passing and passing culture that I want to talk about for this video, and that is passing privilege. Controversial opinion time. We need a better word or phrase than passing privilege for the advantages we get as a result of passing for someone we're not. Now you may be thinking, but wait a minute, aren't those advantages exactly what privilege is? What else are we supposed to call it? And I don't know, that's one of the big reasons I'm making this video, to see if any of you have some ideas. But simply calling it passing privilege doesn't fully encapsulate everything about this concept, and it does the people in that position a huge disservice. If you're assumed to be part of a privileged group, then yes, you do benefit from the same advantages the rest of that group has. But there's another layer to it, which is that the moment anyone finds out who you really are, all of that privilege would disappear. One of the hallmarks of privilege is that if you have it, you're in a position to remain blissfully unaware of the issues that affect those outside of your group. In the words of Marie Beecham, privilege isn't the presence of perks and benefits, it's the absence of obstacles and barriers. That's a lot harder to notice. If you have a hard time recognizing your privileges, focus on what you don't have to go through. Let that fuel your empathy and action. And in a similar vein, in the words of Janaea Future Khan, privilege isn't about what you've gone through, it's about what you haven't had to go through. In practice, this means things like white people don't have to think about racism, able-bodied people don't have to think about ableism, straight people don't have to think about homophobia, etc., because it doesn't directly affect them. But passing privilege doesn't come with that lack of awareness. You will not only be aware, but hyper-aware of all the adversities you would face if you were outed. And that is going to be a constant weight on your shoulders. Let's look at an example of this. We all know that male privilege exists as part of the patriarchy, right? But the male privilege that a trans man gets from passing as cis is not the same as the male privilege a cis man gets from just being cis. And that's because a cis man doesn't have to think about his position as a man in society. His gender was not misinterpreted or held up to scrutiny by others, it was just accepted for what it was. And when we think about some of the aspects of male privilege and what men don't have to think about, one of those things is misogyny. That's true for cis men, but a trans man may very well have been subjected to misogyny at some point in his life before he transitioned, even if he passes as a cis man now. In fact, the later in life he transitioned, the more likely it is that he was subjected to some sort of misogyny in the past, and he knows he could be subjected to that again if anyone found out he was assigned female at birth and then started treating him like a woman. Cis men don't ever have to worry about that. And this is why I think we need a better word or phrase than passing privilege, because for the people who have it, it's conditional. It could be revoked at the drop of a hat. In my opinion, that sets it apart from actual privilege in a pretty significant way, and it's just another signifier of how passing culture fails us all. Unlike true privilege, passing privilege looks like the following things. Having to navigate and conform to social expectations, whether or not you want to, just to keep your position. This means that you're never able to live your full truth, which is hard. And I want to talk about a specific example of this in the trans community, which is the concept of going stealth. Stealth means that you pass as a cis person of your gender so well that no one can tell you're trans. And that's a goal for a lot of trans people, which is fine, but it does require major levels of conformity. The biggest one is that you have to fit into the man-woman binary, and you have to fit into it so well that no one would ever suspect you were assigned a gender on the other side of it. If you're a trans man, you've got to be extra masculine. If you're a trans woman, you've got to be hyper feminine. And you have to work twice as hard as your cis counterparts to achieve that. And if your gender doesn't fit within that binary, well, you can either pass as the gender you are or pass as cis, take your pick. And even if your gender expression doesn't fit within the binary. So for example, if you're a trans man who has long hair or wears high heels, or if you're a trans woman who dresses butch and doesn't shave your legs, well, too bad, because all it takes is one little thing like that to give you away, and then your cis-passing stealth privilege is gone. Which leads me to the next thing that passing privilege is like. Living under constant fear of being found out. In a lot of ways, being stealth is like the mirror universe of being in the closet. You may be living as your true gender now, but you still have to worry about being outed all the time. You're constantly keeping a secret. You're very aware of the repercussions of people finding out that secret. You're on your guard 24/7, and that's stressful. You know constantly in the back of your mind that all it takes is one thing to bring it all crashing down. It could be a background check for work that reveals your assigned sex at birth to your superiors or even to all of your colleagues. It could be some mail sent to your home that reveals your birth name to everyone you live with. It could be a medical emergency where someone has to make decisions for you when you're incapacitated, and the doctor spills the beans about your anatomy to that person. And when you constantly have that level of worry on your shoulders, especially if you live in a small town where everyone knows everyone and you're not even sure if you can trust a therapist to keep your secret, that is a lot for one person to carry around. Not knowing who you can trust brings me to my next point about what passing privilege entails. Sacrificing relationships with anyone who could out you. In the early days of medical transition, it was really common for doctors to advise their patients to move to a new area and start over with all new people after they finished transitioning. The idea, of course, being that no one would accept them as their true gender if they knew that person was trans. Nowadays, if a doctor told you to do this, it would come across as very presumptuous and gatekeepy, but this attitude does still persist a lot in society at large. It's something a lot of trans people still do on their own to achieve that stealth status. If you completely cut off contact with anyone who knew you before your transition, then no one can out you against your will. But if that is what you do, think of all the relationships it means you'd be giving up. The people who raised you, your oldest friends, maybe even all of your friends and acquaintances depending on what age you were when you transitioned. And of course, the later in life you transition, the bigger sacrifice you have to make. And not only is this a massively unfair choice, either trusting people to keep your secret or cutting them out of your life, it's oftentimes not a feasible one, especially the more connected our world becomes regardless of geography. And it's not a choice anyone should ever have to make in the first place. But people are people, and the only one you can trust 100% is yourself. Which brings me to my last point about what passing privilege involves. Giving up opportunities to help others in your group. Because people are people, there's a chance they might notice if you're always standing up for the trans community and wonder what's up with that. Which means that a lot of trans folks feel like they can no longer stand up for trans rights or participate in the trans community once they pass as cis, just in case anybody gets suspicious. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying everybody has to be an activist. Just because you're trans and trans people are marginalized, that doesn't mean you have to be the one out there on the front lines fighting for change. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is just live your life as a trans person in the face of everything we have to deal with. But there's also a danger if no one is an activist, if no one stands up to do their part. Which is that once you go stealth, once you get yours, so to speak, it's really easy to leave behind all of the other trans people who can't pass as cis in the dust. And that means no real progress is being made. And that's exactly what passing culture aims to do, right? That's why it's so harmful. It sets up this divide between the people who pass and the people who don't, to keep us from joining together in a community. And I'm not just talking about activism, but also other things like not going to Pride anymore, or not going to trans support groups anymore, or not hanging out with a trans group of friends anymore. Too often, people feel like they have to give that up as part of going stealth, and no one should ever be put in that position. Now, having heard all this, you may be thinking, well, aren't all these sacrifices a choice that people make to get the privilege they want? And if that's the case, why do we need to call it something other than privilege? I'll give you my two reasons. First of all, passing privilege isn't really a choice. It's often a matter of safety or even life and death. People aren't trying to step into privilege. They're just trying to step out of a situation that would otherwise be dangerous. And second, all of the sacrifices a person has to make to achieve passing privilege involve the erasure of their truth, of the core of their humanity. And no matter what kind of advantages that may bring, I have a really hard time conceiving of that level of erasure as any kind of privilege. And I think we need to be talking about this more. I think we need to acknowledge the difference between real, actual privilege and passing privilege, which, when you break it down, isn't truly privilege at all. Beyond that, we need to be working to change our culture and our society into one where you don't have to pass as someone you're not just to survive, much less get a leg up. We need to be aiming for a world where no one is marginalized for something that's outside of their control. I'm not naive, and I know this isn't going to happen overnight, or, let's be real, probably within my lifetime. But as long as we keep getting bogged down in these discussions about how much privilege people have for passing, we're never going to be focusing on dismantling the systems that require people to pass as someone they're not in the first place. We're just upholding a world where privilege, in whatever form it takes, continues to exist. So, with all of those admittedly heavy thoughts in mind, now is the time when I want to turn the conversation over to you. Do you have a word or a phrase or a way to think about this concept of passing privilege that describes the situation better? Do you consistently pass as someone you're not, and how does that affect you, good and bad? Do you pass for some reasons or in some situations but not others, and how do those experiences compare and contrast for you? This is a big topic with a lot of potential discussion to be had, and I would love to start that conversation. Not just about the idea of passing as cis, but also passing as straight, passing as white, passing as able-bodied, passing as neurotypical, etc. So if you have any thoughts to share, please drop those in the comments below. And while you're here, please feel free to check out some of my other videos. Like I mentioned, this one is part of a series of videos around the idea of passing culture, and I also have more vlogs like this one about my experiences as a queer person. I have cosplay music videos, I have makeup demos and tutorials, and most recently I have started posting recordings of my singing voice for posterity prior to starting testosterone. So please feel free to stick around and like and subscribe so you don't miss anything new. If you want to reach out to me on other social media, I am GC Kinsey across all platforms. And with that, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate your support. I hope you learned a lot, and I will see you on the next one.